Coming weeks, cycling's governing body, the UCI, will deliver its verdict on one of modern sport's most celebrated icons, the 7-time winner of the Tour de France, Lance Armstrong. The United States Anti-Doping Agency says that Armstrong was a drug cheat, part of an organized conspiracy by the US Postal Service team to dupe the public and fool the authorities.
The totality of the evidence is overwhelming. You're looking at the Bernie Madoff of sport. This is the biggest fraud in the history of sport. The biggest. He couldn't have done it alone.
When money's involved, big money, then of course the cheats come as well.
Lance Armstrong entered cycling as a brash young competitor, full of enthusiasm but limited in his all-round ability. His mentor then was the Australian racer Phil Anderson.
Did he strike you in those days as a cyclist who could eventually win the Tour de France?
For me, no. To be a good tour rider, you have to be a good time trialist and you have to be a good mountain climber. And he wasn't particularly strong in those two areas. To me, he didn't have what it took in those early years.
Lance Armstrong was then with the American Motorola team. So too was New Zealander Stephen Swart. Stephen Swart says that in 1995, when Phil Anderson had left the team, the riders complained that their European opponents were doping.
Did you talk with Lance Armstrong about the need to start using EPO to be competitive?
We had a discussion about it, yeah.
What did Mr. Armstrong say?
He did say, you know, if we're going to the Tour, we've got to perform. We need the results.
What did that mean?
I think he just said he didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. You know, if we were going to be competitive, there was only one road to take.
Was there a discussion about doping in any way with Mr. Swart?
The only aspect that is true is that he was on the team. Beyond that, not true.
The doping allegations arose in a case brought by Lance Armstrong against an insurer based in Dallas, Texas, who provided huge bonuses paid to Armstrong for winning the Tour de France in successive years.
These are the checks making the first 2 payments under the contract. These checks represent when he won on the 4th and the 5th, making those payments for $1.5 million and then $3 million. Obviously, no one ever won 6 before.
Attorney Jeff Tillotson represented the insurer, who refused to pay a further $5 million when Armstrong won his 6th Tour de France in 2004.
Obviously, no one would want to guarantee a payment to an event that was fixed or to which someone was cheating, because that's a risk no one would take.
Well, was it fixed?
Well, my client, and we think now the evidence clearly shows that Lance Armstrong was in fact using performance-enhancing drugs for both the 4th, 5th, and 6th Tour de France races, which are the ones my clients had risk on. We also think the evidence we developed showed that he had been using performance-enhancing drugs long before we ever got involved, and even dating back to the beginning of his career. So in my client's mind, yes, those races were fixed.
Mr. Armstrong, my name is Jeff Tillotson. I represent...
Jeff Tillotson has done something USADA has been unable to do.
Whether it's a blessing or a curse, I remain the only lawyer to have actually taken sworn testimony from Lance Armstrong and to have had him deny under oath with the penalty of perjury that he used performance-enhancing drugs.
You understand that although we're in the conference room of your lawyers, you are giving testimony as if you are in a court of law. Do you understand that? Correct. And that penalties of perjury attach to this deposition just like they would to a court of law proceeding? Of course. Did you, in fact...
Tonight, for the first time, sworn depositions from Lance Armstrong and other key witnesses are being broadcast. This evidence laid the foundation for later investigations, including USADA's.
Armstrong has the advantage here. He's on the right side of these riders.
Lance Armstrong's dream was to win the Tour de France.
Now Armstrong goes on the left of the picture. Lance Armstrong in his first Tour de France. They all said he was too young. He gets it behind. Lance Armstrong...
In his first tour, he won a stage, but 3 years later, it looked like his dream had died. In this film, for his cancer charity Livestrong, Armstrong described what happened.
I had excruciating headaches, blurry vision, coughing up of blood. Had been debating on whether or not I should go to the doctor for a long time, but finally went. He said, "Lance, I hate to tell you this, but you have advanced testicular cancer."
Look how young we all look, jeez.
Lance Armstrong's closest friends gathered round. Among them, Betsy Andreu and her fiancé Frankie, who was close to Armstrong and rode with him on his team.
Frankie, Lance.
Armstrong was due to consult with his doctors. What happened next shocked Betsy Andreu to the core.
When the doctors came, I suggested we leave to give him his privacy, and he said, "That's okay, you can stay." So we stayed. The doctor started asking Lance a couple of banal questions, and then boom, have you ever used any performance-enhancing drugs? Lance, hanging onto his IV, rattled off EPO, testosterone, cortisone, growth hormone, and steroids. My eyes popped out of my head, and Frankie said, "I think we should leave the room." And we left the room. And Frankie and I had just been engaged 6 weeks previously, and I said, "That's how he got his cancer. If you are doing that, I am not marrying you. We can stay, we can stay."
Years later, Betsy and Frankie Andreu recalled under oath what had happened.
The doctor asked him a couple of questions, and then came the question, "Have you ever taken any performance-enhancing drugs?" And Lance said yes. The doctor said, "What were they?" And he said, EPO, growth hormone, cortisone, steroids, and testosterone.
What is it Mr. Armstrong said in response to the doctor asking him about use of performance-enhancing drugs?
I don't know how the doctor phrased the question, but Lance's response was that he had taken EPO and testosterone and growth hormone and cortisone.
Also in the hospital that day was Stephanie McIlvaine, who worked as a rep for one of Lance Armstrong's main sponsors, Oakley.
After we were deposed, the day after, Stephanie called, sobbing. Stephanie told me that her husband was called into one of the higher-ups of the company, where he is vice president of global marketing for Oakley, one of Lance's sponsors. And Stephanie was told, if you make the company look bad, you're going to lose your job. And so we said, that's it. She's going to lie. She's going to lie. She's not going to say it happened.
Were you ever in a hospital room or other part of the hospital with Mr. Armstrong where he said anything about performance-enhancing drugs?
No.
Do you have any recollection of any doctor in your presence asking Mr. Armstrong if he used in the past any performance-enhancing drugs or substances?
No.
Okay.
Stephanie McIlvaine gave her sworn deposition at Oakley's headquarters in California. The year before, out of the blue, she'd received a phone call from an American cycling legend.
Hello?
Stephanie?
Yeah?
This is Greg Lamont calling.
Greg who?
Greg Lamont.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
How you doing?
I'm doing well. Hold on, Dylan.
Greg LeMond in the leader's yellow jersey, 1 minute 30.
Greg LeMond was a three-time winner of the Tour de France, who insisted he never took drugs.
Greg LeMond was untroubled.
LeMond had fallen out with Lance Armstrong, who he suspected of doping. And in 2004, he and Stephanie McIlvaine spoke frankly about what had occurred in the hospital.
I heard from a source outside of the group here of what happened at the hospital, and Betsy and I've talked a little bit, and I'm not asking you to do anything you would never want to do, but you know, if I did get down to where it was a lawsuit, would you be willing to testify, or?
If I was subpoenaed, I would. Yeah. Because I'm not going to lie. You know, I was in that room. I heard it. You know.
What Stephanie McIlvaine didn't know was that Greg LeMond was secretly recording their conversation.
Lance Armstrong's lawyers immediately backed off this issue and agreed in a written stipulation we presented to the panel that Stephanie McIlvaine had been untruthful under oath and had told two different stories about what happened in the Indiana University Hospital room.
And you heard her testimony regarding certain...
Even so, Lance Armstrong and his doctors insisted that he was never asked about performance-enhancing drugs.
Do you deny the statements that Miss Andrew attributed to you in the Indiana University Hospital?
100%, absolutely.
Did any medical person ask you while you were at the Indiana University Hospital whether you had ever used any sort of performance-enhancing drugs or substances?
Nope, absolutely not.
Can you offer, or can you help explain to me why Miss Andrew would make that story up?
Well, she said in her deposition she hates me.
Is it your testimony that Mr. Andrew was also lying when he said that he heard you say those things regarding your prior use?
100%. But I feel for him.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think he's trying to back up his old lady.
How has Lance Armstrong treated you following this incident?
Oh, I mean, how he has described me to people he presumed would never meet me is pretty amazing. Think of just any derogatory adjective, and basically, I'm nuts, just crazy. I'm really jealous. I'm hateful. I'm vindictive, I'm bitter. And so this has been a quest to clear my name because I never, ever, ever lied about anything, ever.
2 days after the Andreus gave their sworn evidence, Indiana University announced an endowment of $1.5 million for a chair in oncology to honor the doctor whose team treated Armstrong for cancer. The endowment was funded by the Lance Armstrong Foundation.
I just want to be clear. These are very separate issues. And I'm endowing and funding a chair for somebody who saved my life.
Throughout the 1990s, riders and their teams worked hard to cover up the increasing use of performance-enhancing drugs. Their job was made easier by the fact that the drug of choice in the peloton at the time, the blood booster EPO, was undetectable. So popular was EPO that the peloton invented a term for riders who didn't use it.
The translation was riding on bread and water, and the Italian term is pan e agua. So I was, I guess for the first few months of the '97 season, I was riding on pane agua, bread and water.
Tyler Hamilton's revelations about drug taking in cycling have created headlines around the world. Like many top racers, Tyler Hamilton started out as a drug-free rider. But when he joined the US Postal Service team, he saw veteran riders getting preferential treatment. They would be given white lunch bags between races. He wanted his lunch bag too.
The doctor at US Postal Service said that, I had enormous potential. So basically, eventually when I was given my first white lunch bag, it was a sign to me that they believe in me, they believe in my potential, and they believe in me, my long-term talent.
The lunch bags contained the banned drug EPO, designed to raise a cyclist's hematocrit level.
Your hematocrit's a percentage of red blood cells in your body. Your red blood cells carry oxygen to your muscles. So basically, the higher your red blood cell percentage, the better your muscles are going to operate under stress. So in layman's terms, the more red blood cells you have, the faster you're going to ride a bike.
So what was the doctor's solution to raising those levels?
Yeah, a couple months before, maybe a month and a half before my first Tour de France, it was EPO.
Under UCI rules at the time, riders were allowed a hematocrit level of 50%, but no higher. Tyler Hamilton says doctors would tell riders what their glow time was with different drugs.
You were given the limits on, you know, what product would, how long you'd glow for, how long you'd test positive for. So as long as you played by what the team doctors told you, you know, it was more or less pretty, at the time, it was pretty easy to pass these tests. You know, I passed a couple hundred doping controls myself, you know.
When Lance Armstrong joined the US Postal Service team in 1998, following his recovery from cancer, he shared a room with Tyler Hamilton.
Did you both talk about drugs together?
We did. You know, it wasn't, every conversation wasn't about drugs, but yeah, we talked about it, you know, behind closed doors, absolutely. 98, I was pretty green, and so I asked a lot of questions, and, you know, I learned a lot.
So he was quite open with you.
Tyler Hamilton says Lance Armstrong was surprisingly relaxed about where he kept his EPO.
When I was at his house in Nice, France, I asked him for some, and he kindly said, yeah, no problem. And it was just on the inside door of his refrigerator, just in the box that it came in, and, you know, a surprise that it was right there, kind of out in the open.
French police began investigations into Festina after banned drugs, including steroids, were found in one of the team cars on July 8th. Festina's doctor, Eric Reichhardt, was questioned and later charged under France's Anti-Drugs Act.
As the 1998 Tour de France got underway, the lid was blown off systematic doping in the peloton.
It was pretty clear that there was a major problem. The French police are arresting team members or followers with industrial quantities of doping substances and equipment.
In the start house now is Lance Armstrong.
The following year, the Tour de France was billed as the Tour of Renewal. Teams were terrified of being raided, but Lance Armstrong came prepared, with a delivery man in tow called Moto Man.
Moto Man was this gardener/handyman for Lance Armstrong. The team I was on didn't carry performance-enhancing drugs. So to get EPO for the Tour de France, we came up with a plan, and the plan had Moto Man involved, where he would follow the race, always stay within probably a half-hour drive of our motorcycle drive from our hotel. He basically had the container filled with EPO, and he would basically just wait for a phone call on a secret phone, and when he had to do a delivery, he'd do a delivery.
And Armstrong coming up now. Now, can he get off to a great start in the Tour de France? He is aiming at 8 minutes and 9 seconds. He's certainly ahead of Chris Bourman at this point. My goodness me, 8:02.51. Lance Armstrong, with that performance, Paul, I think may have done enough.
This is where the legend began. On the very first day of his comeback Tour de France, Lance Armstrong won the prologue.
Lance Armstrong has delivered a great blow.
3 weeks later, less than 3 years after being diagnosed with cancer, he won his first Tour de France. It would be the first of 7.
He came back again and again and again, winning tour after tour, and he did it 7 times. And of course, it's a record, and nobody's ever done it. And it's, for many people, it was unacceptable. It was impossible to do that without taking drugs.
Well, what do you think?
Look, I admit I've been very proud to commentate on Armstrong over these years, because I've seen a man, and I've seen how he's battled the elements, and I've seen how he's come forward, and I'm very sad. What do I think? Everybody else did it, so I find it very difficult not to think that Lance did it.
The evidence suggests Lance Armstrong was doping big time. Tyler Hamilton says that after finishing a stage, he, Armstrong, and their teammate Kevin Livingston would inject themselves with EPO in the team's camper, just meters from the excited fans outside.
That was nerve-wracking, because you're right there in the heart of the Tour de France, you know. Thousands and thousands of people hovering around your the team camper, and we have this performance-enhancing drug, so I remember just trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible because, you know, there was one for Lance, one for Kevin, and one for myself. And, you know, you quickly just stuck it in, got rid of it, and then it was quickly hidden away, typically in like a Coke can. All 3 vials would go into a Coke can and would crush it, give it to a team doctor to dispose.
But it didn't all go to plan. Lance Armstrong was tested for drugs during the tour, and one of his samples revealed a significant level of a banned corticosteroid. Emma O'Reilly was a soigneur on the team, whose duties included giving Armstrong a massage after his rides. During one of these massages, she says, an urgent discussion took place between Armstrong and the team's management.
The conversation that was occurring really was, what are we going to do? Here's the problem. We need a solution, and how do we act upon the solution, and are we happy with the solution? So the problem was Lance had tested high in the cortisone. The solution was a potential prescription. What was the prescription for? Why was he taking it? Are we all happy with that? Yeah, we're happy with that. Right, let's go down then and speak to Luis, who's the team doctor, and get him to write the prescription.
Dr. Luis Del Moral has now been issued with a lifetime sporting ban by the US anti-doping agency, USADA. Emma O'Reilly says the doctor issued a prescription to Armstrong for a cortisone cream for saddle sores and backdated it.
Had he complained to you about saddle sores?
No. It wasn't about saddle sores. The whole thing was just a backdated prescription to help kind of explain his elevated cortisone level in the test of the prologue.
Of course, if he had been prescribed this cream, then it should have been listed as on the therapeutic use exemption.
Yeah, and it wasn't, because he wasn't taking the cream. You know, it was just purely backdated to cover up that cortisone elevation, yeah. The backdated prescription was rigged to suit the test.
When she was subpoenaed to give sworn evidence, Emma O'Reilly insisted that her memory was clear.
Is there any doubt in your mind as to what happened and what you heard?
None whatsoever, at all. I can still, to this day, picture the whole scene vividly.
She was labeled a traitor by Lance Armstrong. She was told she'd never work in the business again by the Armstrong group. We found her to be extremely credible on the issues in which, and the things she said she'd seen and done.
Lance Armstrong escaped being sanctioned for having a banned corticosteroid in his system. In 2000, a test was introduced for EPO. Tyler Hamilton says that he and Lance Armstrong continued to dope, using microdoses of EPO which would pass through the body more rapidly, and an undetectable type of doping, blood transfusions. Under this procedure, blood would be taken from a cyclist, stored in a refrigerator, and then reinfused at a later date, boosting the cyclist's red blood cells.
It seemed kind of sort of caveman-like, you know, taking out your own blood, and not seeing it for 3 or 4 weeks, and then getting it back in, reinfusing it back in.
Who was organizing all of that?
Lance and Johan Bernal and the Dr. Del Moral.
Tyler Hamilton says that after stage 11 of the 2000 Tour de France, he, Lance Armstrong and Kevin Livingston had their blood reinfused. Everything was laid on by the US Postal team management.
We were in this small hotel. It was pretty wild. I arrived in my room and it was, you know, the staff had sort of prepared everything, the doctors, and there was a blood bag taped up on the wall, hanging from the wall, and, you know, a red tube coming down, a tube filled with blood coming down, and basically, you know, injected me here. I have pretty small veins, so the one place that always worked was right there, and you can see the scars today.
Tyler Hamilton says the three riders lay on beds in adjoining rooms with an open door between them.
Could you see Lance Armstrong?
Yeah. You know, that's a question that's been asked a lot. Yeah, I saw him. I saw his bag of blood and saw it in his arm, yeah.
They were taking a huge gamble.
I'm glad we didn't get caught. You know, I would have been, we all would have been. Serious stuff, and like now looking back, oh my God, what was I doing? But you're so deep into it, you know, you don't even have time to take a half step back and look at the big picture.
In 2005, Lance Armstrong denied under oath ever having received a blood transfusion.
You've never used your own blood for doping purposes, for example?
Absolutely, that would be banned.
Okay. I'm not trying to agitate you. I'm just trying to make sure your testimony is clear.
Okay.
Okay? All right.
The whole point of blood doping is to increase the number of red cells in your circulation. The blood transfusions have the advantage of not being detectable. Even today, we don't have a foolproof method of establishing when an athlete has reinfused their own blood.
So does that mean that athletes now and cyclists now are transfusing their own blood back into themselves?
There's no doubt. There's no doubt that's happening.
That same year, Lance Armstrong left the stage to huge acclaim, following his 7th straight victory in the Tour de France. But a month later, the EPO which Motorman had delivered during his first Tour victory came back to haunt him. In a sensational scoop in the French newspaper L'Équipe, Lance Armstrong was accused of lying about performance-enhancing drugs.
And le mensonge Armstrong in French, it means that, yes, he's a liar, but all his story is a lie. All his story. Yeah, a double sense in French.
What was the reaction?
Damien Ressiot, an investigative journalist for L'Équipe, had written a story claiming the newspaper had proof that Lance Armstrong took EPO during the 1999 Tour de France.
Sa victoire est lâchée catégorique et sale. C'est-à-dire que nous avons prouvé à l'équipe qu'en 1999, il a gagné le Tour de France en prenant de l'EPO. C'est indiscutable. C'est scientifiquement indiscutable. D'ailleurs, lui-même ne l'a même pas discuté, puisque lorsque j'ai sorti mon travail d'investigation le concernant, aucun procès de sa part, alors que M. Armstrong est entouré d'une vingtaine d'avocats en permanence. Il n'a fait aucun procès à l'équipe, aucun procès à moi. Il a juste dit « Non, c'est pas vrai, je n'ai jamais pris de PO », c'est tout. Mais nous savons, et c'est formellement avéré, qu'il a pris de l'EPO en 1999.
Lance Armstrong swears he has never taken performance-enhancing drugs, and that in over 500 tests throughout his career, he never once tested positive. But the strongest scientific evidence that he was doping comes from this highly specialized French laboratory. Testers here found clear evidence of EPO in samples which were later identified as Lance Armstrong's. During the '99 Tour, which Armstrong won, urine samples from the riders were sent to this lab on the outskirts of Paris to be tested.
So, what is this room?
This room is the EPO room. In this room, we perform the anti-doping analysis for EPO.
At the time, a test for EPO was still not ready.
For the EPO test, the test for detection of EPO was developed in this laboratory. So I personally performed the development of this test. And it took a very long time. It took about 6 years to develop this test. And it was ready in 2000.
4 years later, as part of the lab's research, but not as part of a formal testing process, the 1999 samples were re-examined, and some were found to contain the banned drug. 6 samples given by Lance Armstrong were found to contain EPO.
Why was it only revealed years later that these samples belonged to Lance Armstrong?
It was only a coincidence of events. A journalist requested from the cycling governing body, the UCI, to have access to some of Lance Armstrong's doping control forms. The UCI voluntarily gave all of Armstrong's forms from that race to the journalist, who then cross-matched the lab numbers that were on those forms with the samples that had been analysed quite separately by the laboratory, and he was the one that matched the lab numbers to the samples that contained EPO. The lines here are a delineation between...
Mike Ashenden is a former independent expert for the UCI who helped develop a blood test for EPO for the Sydney Olympics.
Which of these samples belongs to Lance Armstrong?
Well, if we go to the doping control form, we see 160297. And that corresponds with this sample here, 160297. And we see that for that sample, there was 100% basic isoforms, which tells us that the system was flooded with synthetic EPO when that sample was provided.
So at what stage in the tour was that taken?
That was the prologue. That was the first day of the 99 tour.
Is there any doubt in your mind that the positive results for EPO were scientifically correct?
Yes, they are scientifically correct.
Do you know whether or not the samples which...
When questioned about this under oath, Lance Armstrong put forward an alternative explanation.
I can only believe that they either are not mine or have been manipulated, because when I pissed in the bottle, as I told you earlier, having never taken performance-enhancing drugs, when I pissed in the bottle, there was not EPO in that piss or urine.
Lance Armstrong, when he criticised those results, alleged that maybe those samples had been spiked or manipulated. Is there any truth in that?
No, it has no sense, because the analyses were performed for our research.
Cycling's governing body, the UCI, has never sanctioned Lance Armstrong following the revelation by L'Équipe that 6 of his samples from the 1999 Tour de France contained EPO.
How did the UCI react to these results?
In a way that I feel ashamed of. Rather than open their doors and say, let's try and understand what's going on here inside of our sport, they instead, as far as I could work out, tried to shut the case down.
Should the UCI have acted on those results?
In my view, of course they should have. They had the power to say, all right, you doped, you're out.
On one other occasion, the UCI chose not to act. In 2001, Tyler Hamilton alleges Lance Armstrong tested positive for EPO.
Luckily, we had the right people on our side.
The test occurred during that year's tour of Switzerland. Tyler Hamilton says Lance Armstrong's advisor on doping, the Italian Dr. Michele Ferrari, had told Armstrong to take microdoses of EPO to ensure he didn't test positive. USADA says that in all, Lance Armstrong paid Dr. Ferrari more than $1 million for his doping advice. But on this occasion, it went wrong.
He told me he had a positive test for EPO, which was very surprising because, you know, it seemed like it was foolproof.
My understanding is that a sample had been provided and analysed by the laboratory, and they had found that there was evidence of synthetic EPO in that sample.
The UCI says Tyler Hamilton's allegations are completely unfounded. But less than a year after the tour of Switzerland, Lance Armstrong wrote a personal cheque to the UCI for $25,000, and his company gave a further $100,000 in 2005. In his sworn evidence, Armstrong's recollection of his donations was vague.
You have made a contribution or donation to the UCI, have you not?
I have, yeah.
Do you know when that was made?
Some years ago, I don't recall exactly.
2000, for example?
I don't know.
Was it, was there anything that occasioned that you recall? Like, I'm doing it because of X or Y or Z?
I'm doing it to fund the fight against doping.
For an athlete to be paying money to the people who police him it's unconscionable.
To have somebody who's at the center of the controversy make this kind of a donation to the organization that has the power to sanction him, it sets up an impossible conflict of interest.
Lance Armstrong is not alone among drug cheats. Since 1998, more than a third of the top 10 finishers in the Tour de France have been linked to doping. But the will of the UCI to shut down the doping networks is being questioned, not least by the former head of the World Anti-Doping Agency, Dick Pound. Mr. Pound cites a conversation he had with the former UCI president, Hein Verbruggen.
I said, Hein, you guys have a huge problem in your sport. He said, what do you mean? I said, the doping. Well, he said, that's really the fault of the spectators. And I said, I beg your pardon, it's the spectators' fault? Well, he said, yes. If they were happy with the Tour de France at 25K, it would be fine. But he said if they wanted it 41, 42, he said the riders have to prepare. And I just shook my head and said, well, you heard it here first, you got a big problem.
Jörg Jakscher is a former cyclist who also questions the UCI's commitment to stamp out systematic doping in the peloton's top teams. From his earliest days as a professional, he was told how the system works.
The team manager, one day he took me by his side like a father, kind of a father thing, and said, listen, I have to explain you why it is that you're permanently dropped, and this is the solution. So if you want to do it, we can do it. Everyone in our team does it. The team pays for it. And yeah, so I was confronted with the situation that there is organized doping in cycling.
Jörg Jakscher and Tyler Hamilton came unstuck when in 2006 Spanish police conducted a raid on a doctor in Madrid and found blood bags, drugs and paperwork implicating them and other cyclists.
When did you first...
Later, Jörg Jakscher gave sworn evidence to the German authorities.
In the end, why did you decide to come clean?
I didn't like the hypocrisy in the sport. So the Operación Puerto, which was this Spanish drug operation, in which I was implicated also, and in which a lot of riders were implicated, they kind of showed me the real face of people running the cycling system. And the same people that first brought me to Fuentes or asked me to do doping or use other performance-enhancing drugs, they were the same people that suddenly started a movement for the credible cycling and were pointing the finger at us riders. I don't have a chance to come back as an athlete, but...
Jörg Jakscher had raced with several different teams, but when he met the UCI to tell them everything he knew, they failed to act on his detailed revelations.
As far as I know, no one of my team managers, of my team doctors, got questioned by the UCI. There was never written accusation, nothing. It's like having a deceased body, a dead body in your basement. It stinks a little bit after a while, and it's going to come up more and more and more. And one day the police is going to find it, and the information is there. The UCI did very little or nothing about it. So it's their problem if the basement stinks.
How has Tyler changed through all of this?
There's been a huge transformation. There's definitely a guard lifted, a weight lifted.
What do you think brought that about?
Telling the truth. Telling the truth.
Do you think that what he's done has been good for the sport?
Of course. I think you need to go back a little bit before you can go forward. So I'm very proud of him.
Now more than ever, it's not about the bike, it's about the truth.
I was kicking and screaming when I had to tell the truth, but little did I know it was the best thing I ever could have done.
What Lance never had was the truth, which is more powerful than the corrupt athlete.
How could it have taken place?
Whether Lance Armstrong will ever confess to doping remains to be seen. In 2005, his denials were passionate.
How many times do I have to say it?
I'm just trying to make sure your testimony is clear.
Well, if it can't be any clearer than I've never taken drugs, then incidents like that could never have happened.
Okay.
How clear is that?
It was really hard for us to tell if Lance actually believed what he was telling and had convinced himself that he hadn't done these things, or that he was just a very persuasive liar.
Okay, I think it's clear.
Attorney Jeff Tillotson and the insurer eventually agreed to pay Lance Armstrong his bonus.
We had one problem. We had a bad contract. Our contract said we will pay him the bonus if he is declared the official winner of a Tour de France race, and he most certainly was. And so that's why we ultimately stopped the case, made the payment, and waited until the regulatory agencies did their investigation.
In Lance Armstrong's hometown of Austin, Texas, he still has many loyal supporters. At Mellow Johnny's, his bike shop, customers are sanguine about the idea of their hero being a cheat.
Lance passed 500 and some tests, right? Hasn't shown a positive yet, but you know, just as a big cycling fan myself and watching a lot of the races, you know, some sort of cheating probably goes on and is probably pretty widespread, but that just kind of comes with the territory.
The 7 yellow jerseys on the wall at Mellow Johnny's are unlikely to be taken down anytime soon. Lance Armstrong says he's moving on and will not be distracted from his work with Livestrong and the fight to beat cancer. The stakes could hardly be higher.
I know the power of this man when he walks into the room, and I know the hope he gives cancer survivors. I mean, I don't know if he is proved to have taken drugs, how he can face any of these people, because, I mean, he can call up Barack Obama. He has his cell phone number on his cell phone. And how can you call up these people knowing that you've taken drugs all your life to cheat to 7 tours? It's a problem I wouldn't want.
If you have a doping offense or you test positive, it goes without saying that you're fired from all of your contracts, not just the team, but there's numerous contracts that I have that would all go away.
Sponsorship agreements, for example.
All of them. And the faith of all the cancer survivors around the world. So everything I do off of the bike would go away too. And don't think for a second, I don't understand that. It's not about money for me. Everything. It's also about the faith that people have put in me over the years. So all of that would be erased. So I don't need it to say in a contract, you're fired if you test positive. That's not as important as losing the support of hundreds of millions of people.